The first time I saw the shed move, I thought it was the wind. It had always been there, behind the house like some quiet sentinel watching from the edge of the woods. My stepfather built it the year he moved in, back when I was 12 and angry and hellbent on staying that way. He named it something dumb, the shop, like it was some proud little kingdom, a fortress of solitude built out of sweat and rusted nails. I used to hate that place. Now, standing in front of it again for the first time in years, keys to the house heavy in my hand, I felt something shift. Not just inside me, but in the air itself, like the structure exhaled when it saw me coming. Weathered wood groaned in the breeze, the door ajar just enough to show the slant of a workbench inside. A familiar scent drifted out, sawdust, oil, cold metal, and something older, like memory soaked into wood. He'd been dead for 3 weeks. I didn't cry at the funeral. Not because I didn't care. God knows I cared too much, more than I ever admitted when he was alive, but because I didn't know how to grieve a man who never said, "I love you," never hugged me, never called me son. He wasn't my real dad. That much I made clear again and again. But he was there, day after day, from the moment my biological father walked out until I graduated, packed up, and swore I'd never come back. And yet here I was. My mom couldn't handle it alone. The cancer had already carved through too much of her. She wasn't just mourning, she was unraveling. I flew in the day after the funeral, not to mourn, but to sort, to clean, to pack what was his and put it in boxes so we could sell the place. But the moment I stepped into the house, it was like time folded in on itself. He was everywhere. Not in photographs. He hated having his picture taken, but in the creak of the floorboards he once repaired, the careful labels on the circuit breaker box, the squeaky hinge on the basement door he never got around to fixing. And in that damned shed. I'd barely been inside the house an hour when I found myself wandering toward it, pulled more by muscle memory than intention. The door gave easily. Inside, it was exactly as I remembered, neat, too neat, in that obsessive way he'd always kept it. Every tool hung in its exact place, every bolt and nail sorted by size and repurposed baby food jars with hand-scribbled labels in his crooked block letters. I walked through it like a ghost passing through another ghost, brushing my hand over the worn handle of a plane, the nicked edge of a chisel. Something clanked behind me. I turned. Nothing. Just a hammer on the workbench. Hadn't that been hanging on the pegboard when I walked in? I shook my head. Grief does strange things. I picked it up and returned it to the wall. Then I left, locking the shed behind me. The next morning, I went back. I don't know why. Maybe I was just looking for something real in the middle of everything that felt fake. The condolences, the casseroles, the sad-eyed stares. The hammer was back on the workbench. No, not just lying there, set there. Carefully. Like someone had just used it. I stared at it for a long time. He never said, "I love you." Not when he taught me to ride a bike. Not when he helped me build my first Pinewood Derby car. Not when he stood silent in the back at my high school graduation, wearing a jacket that didn't fit and shoes too tight from disuse. I remember being angry about that, too, like he wasn't proud enough to cheer. But now I think maybe he just didn't want to embarrass me. Love, for him, wasn't a word. It was a thing you built. Like a table, or a life. One screw at a time. Steady. Quiet. Permanent. I began to clean the shed. Not out of duty. Not for my mom. For him. Every jar I opened, every drawer I sorted, I found pieces of him, scraps of paper with math scrawled out, sketches of projects he'd never gotten to, even a little wooden bird he'd carved and painted bright red, tucked behind the grinder like a secret. And the tools, they kept moving. I tested it. I placed the level on the windowsill. Next morning, back on its hook. A box of screws I moved to the table was back under the bench the following day. Always subtle. Always precise. I didn't tell my mother. I barely spoke to her at all those first few days. She was lost in her own labyrinth of grief, wandering the house like a fading ghost, sometimes calling me by his name without realizing. But the shed, It was awake. That's the only way I can describe it. At night, I'd hear faint sounds. Clinks. Scrapes. The kind of noises you only catch when you're listening too hard. One night I sat in the kitchen until well after midnight, lights off, watching through the window. Something moved. Not a person. A shape. A flicker. The workbench light blinked on for a few seconds, then off again. I went out the next morning. The shop was warm. Just slightly. The kind of warmth that lingers after someone's been working there. And the hammer was on the bench again. The letters started appearing in the third week. Tucked into the drawers. Folded inside old coffee tins. Not many. Just one or two at a time. Written in the same all-caps block lettering. Signed Rick. My stepfather. Letters he never sent. Maybe never meant to. Letters to my mom. Letters to me. Didn't think I'd be any good at this. One read. Not the loving part. But I figure, maybe if I just keep showing up, that'll be enough. Another. He ain't mine by blood, but he's mine. I stared at that one for a long time. My chest hurt in places I didn't know could hurt. Because for the first time, I realized, he didn't just tolerate me. He chose me. Every morning, every chore, every argument he swallowed, every trip he took to the hardware store for something I broke, he chose me. And he kept choosing me. Even now. Even after. By the time I found the final letter of that week, folded beneath the vise like it had been waiting, the wind outside was howling. The note was short. Something stay put, even when we're gone. Some love keeps working, even in the silence. I stepped back, heart thudding. The lights flickered. And the hammer? It slid across the bench. Just an inch. Just enough. Like a hand reaching out in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, knees pulled to my chest like I used to do as a kid when my real father was late again and Mom pretended not to be scared. Back then, Rick was just a quiet man who sat in the kitchen with a mug of black coffee, reading the paper like our broken family was just another puzzle he hadn't figured out yet. Now I understood something I didn't back then. He wasn't waiting for something to fix. He was waiting to be allowed in. The hammer didn't move the next day. It stayed right where I left it, near the edge of the bench, like it was holding its breath. I said something aloud, half laughing, half terrified. You're watching me, aren't you? Nothing. But the silence felt aware. I picked up the hammer and held it in my hand for a long time. It was heavier than I remembered. The grip worn down by years of use, thumb smooth, wood polished by sweat and time. I thought about all the things he built with it. The fence around the garden, the cabinet under the sink, the busted footrest he fixed the night before Mom's back surgery so she'd have something to prop her legs on. Things I barely noticed then. Things I never thanked him for. That night, I dreamed I was 12 again, standing in the shed with sawdust in my mouth and tears in my eyes because I couldn't drive a nail straight. Rick was there, behind me, his voice steady. You don't gotta be perfect, kid. You just gotta finish the job. I woke up sweating. And when I stumbled out to the shed at dawn, still half asleep and trembling, I found something new. A carving. Not big. Just a small wedge of pine, maybe 4 inches long, shaped into a tiny boat. The edges were clean, the lines delicate, a little flag at the top made from curled shavings. It was sitting on the bench next to the hammer like it had always been there. But I knew it hadn't. I would have seen it. I picked it up. Turned it over. Underneath, in the same scrawled handwriting, for when he set sail. The next letter was different. It was addressed to me. Folded carefully. Taped shut with old masking tape. I read it sitting on the workbench, the morning sun slanting through the window and catching the dust in gold streaks. Caleb, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Or close to it. I want you to know I tried. I know I didn't always say the right thing, and I sure as hell didn't say enough. But I tried to show up. I figured maybe that mattered more. I was scared, you know. Scared you'd never see me as anything but some guy who wasn't your dad. But I was proud. Every damn day. Even when you slammed the door. Even when you didn't look back. I built this shed to have something that stayed still. Turns out you stayed too. Right in the middle of me. Rick. Asterisk. I didn't realize I was crying until the ink blurred and I had to fold the paper up to keep from running it. I started fixing things. Not because anyone asked me to, but because the energy of the place demanded it. The porch steps were splintered. I repaired them. The gutters sagged over the back patio. I replaced it. In the shed, I swept the floor, oiled the hinges, even sharpened the blades in the old toolbox. And every time I left something out, a wrench, a pencil, a square, it was back in its place the next day. The tools had their own rhythm. Their own language. I started talking to them like I used to talk to Rick when I was a kid and he was too busy to respond. Not expecting answers, just speaking. I was an asshole to you. I know that now. Silence. I think maybe I didn't want another dad because I was scared you'd leave too. A breeze outside made the trees sway. But you didn't. The tape measure on the table rolled slightly. Unwound by an inch. Then stopped. I laughed. Or sobbed. Maybe both. It wasn't until I started sorting the scrap pile in the back corner that I found the photo. It was hidden inside a rusted cookie tin, wrapped in an oily rag. An old Polaroid, blurry, sun-faded, but unmistakable. Me. 10 years old. Standing on a stool in the shed, grinning with a missing tooth. Rick was behind me, bent over a project, completely unaware the photo was being taken. He wasn't smiling. But there was something on his face, softness, maybe. Focus. Pride. I'd never seen this photo before. It was dated in red ink on the back, May 17, 2005. My birthday. He remembered. He took the photo, or had Mom do it. And he kept it all these years, hidden not in the house, but out here, where he worked, where he breathed, where he lived his quiet truth. Something shifted in me. I placed the photo on the wall, near the workbench. Tacked it up with one of his old nails. The light above the bench flickered on. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel like something was acknowledging the gesture. That night I sat on the back porch with a beer, listening to the crickets and the low rustle of leaves. The stars were so bright it hurt. And I heard the sound again. A soft scrape. A tool sliding into place. I didn't need to check. I knew the shed had claimed me. Not like a prison, but like a memory that won't let go. And maybe, just maybe, like a father finally answering back. I didn't plan to stay as long as I did. The ticket back to Seattle sat crumpled on the counter for days, a silent reminder of the life I was supposed to return to, my job, my apartment, the woman I thought I loved but hadn't called in a week. Every time I picked up my phone to explain, my hand would drift instead to the old brass key now tucked in my pocket, the key to the shed. The damn place felt more like home than anywhere else ever had. The third week after Rick's death, I started building. It wasn't anything grand. Just a shelf. A simple pine plank project from a design he'd sketched in the margins of a hardware store catalog. I found the drawing folded in a drawer marked "Scraps Keep," written in his familiar thick lettering with coffee stains in the corner. He must have intended to make it someday. So I made it for him. My hands hadn't built anything in years, but the muscle memory came back. Holding the board steady. Measuring twice. The smell of freshly cut wood. And the quiet, God, the quiet. It wasn't emptiness. It was sacred. Like the shed was holding its breath while I worked, letting me step into the rhythm he left behind. When I placed the finished shelf on the wall, something shifted again. The hammer, his hammer, tilted off its hook and landed softly on the bench. Like a nod. Or a thank you. I found another note the next day. Taped to the underside of the shelf I'd just mounted. He's got his mother's eyes. But he's got my stubborn. He won't understand until he has a boy of his own. That's the deal we make, I guess. My throat tightened as I read it, tracing the curve of the letters with my thumb. This wasn't a man who left things half done. He'd written these when he knew his time was ending, When the cancer, the hospital visits, the weight loss he wouldn't explain finally caught up to him. And yet he'd chosen to write letters, hide carvings, and whisper love into the tools he used every day. What kind of man does that? A father. A real one. The next morning, my mother joined me at the kitchen table for the first time since the funeral. Her hair was unbrushed, but her eyes were clearer. She looked at the open notebook I had in front of me, his old workshop ledger, where I was copying down measurements and notes, and said quietly, "He always hoped you'd come back." I looked up. "I know." She touched the edge of the page. "He kept things from me. Not secrets, just burdens. He didn't want me to worry." I found his letters. She didn't react. Just nodded, like she'd always known they existed. "He loved you so much, Caleb," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "He just didn't know how to say it without messing it up." I thought about that for a long time after she went back to bed. Maybe words were never his medium. Maybe love, for Rick, was wood and grit and nails. A shelf mounted straight. A door that didn't squeak. A shed that still stood no matter how many storms rolled through. That evening, I opened the last drawer I hadn't dared to touch. It was locked. A rusted padlock hanging from the latch like it was daring me. I didn't have the key. But I didn't need one. Rick always kept a spare beneath the loose floorboard by the vise. I remembered that from the one time he let me help him fix the mower engine. I pried the board up and there it was, tarnished brass on a frayed red string. Inside the drawer were three things. A photo of him and my mother from their wedding day. Her in a green dress. Him in a rented suit, looking terrified and in love. A small box with 2 dog tags inside. Richard Allen Price. A bundle of envelopes, all addressed to me. Sealed. There were 5. I stared at them for a long time. Hands trembling. Then I opened the first. "You were never a second choice. Not even once. You were the reason I kept coming home. You didn't make it easy. But that's how I knew you were mine." The second. "Every time you broke something, I fixed it. Not because I had to. Because I wanted you to know, nothing is beyond repair." The third. "I put everything back in its place because I knew someday you'd need it. You'd need to know that even if I was gone, I'd left a map." I set them down. I couldn't read the last 2. Not yet. Not while my heart felt like it was being rebuilt with each word, disassembled and nailed back together by someone who had mastered the art of silent devotion. That night, the shed was alive. Not in a horror movie way. Not with creaks and shadows. But with presence. I stood in the doorway, looking at everything I used to overlook, the straight lines, the perfect joints, the care it took to keep something ordinary from falling apart. And then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A second carving. Sitting on the highest shelf. A small wooden heart. Rough edges. Uneven. Like a boy made it. My heart dropped. I had made it. When I was 15. After a fight with Mom. I'd run into the shed to get away from the noise, from the world, and Rick had handed me a chunk of scrap and said, "Go ahead. Beat it up if you need to." I'd carved a heart and thrown it in the trash. He kept it. He kept it. I held it in my hand, stunned. On the back, now darkened with age, was a new carving, faint, shallow. Still whole. And for the first time in my life, I understood everything Rick had ever done. He hadn't just filled in the space my father left. He became the shape of what a father should be. Later that night, I opened the 4th letter. "If you're still in that shed, then I guess you felt it too. This place isn't haunted, Caleb. It's held. Held by the work we did here. By the hours. By the love we never had the right words for." And then the 5th. "Tell your boy I said hi. And if you ever have a shed of your own, leave the door open sometimes. Let it breathe. Let it remember." I folded them back slowly. Walked outside. And for the first time since he died, I said it aloud, standing under the stars. "I love you, Rick." A gust of wind passed through the trees. And in the shed behind me, something clicked. The hammer slid back into place. The morning after I read the last of Rick's letters, the shed felt different. Lighter, maybe? Or quieter in a deeper way. Not the emptiness of something abandoned, but the stillness of something finished. Like a song that had finally played its last note. But I wasn't finished. Because even if Rick was gone, he'd left me something more than letters and carvings. He left unfinished work. I could feel it in the bones of the place, in the weight of the tools, in the blueprint sketches he never built. He'd laid the foundation for something he never got to see through. And now it was mine. I spent the next week sorting the woodpile and reorganizing the wall of hand tools. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even necessary. But something in me needed it. The ritual. The rhythm. The same way he used to tinker with broken flashlights and leaky faucets, not because he had to, but because he didn't know how else to love. That's what I was learning, slowly and painfully. Love wasn't just the things we say. It's the things we touch. The things we fix. The things we refuse to throw away even when they're cracked down the middle. Rick never said, "I love you." But he left a lifetime of "I love yous" tucked inside drawers and hung on pegboards. Mom came into the shed one afternoon, while I was sanding down an old stool we used to eat breakfast on. She stood in the doorway like she was afraid to break something invisible. "I used to hate this place," she said. "Thought it was stealing him from me." I didn't look up. Just kept sanding, slow and steady. "But now," she looked around. "Now I think it was the only place he could breathe." I nodded. "It still smells like him." She smiled, soft, sad but real. "You sound more like him every day." And then she did something she hadn't done in years. She stepped inside. Walked over to his bench. Ran her fingers over the wood like she was tracing a memory. Then she looked at me and said, "You're not going back, are you?" I shook my head. "I don't think I ever really left." She nodded like she already knew that. Then handed me something wrapped in a dish towel. When I opened it, I nearly dropped it. His watch. The old leather-strapped one he wore to church and weddings and the day he taught me how to patch drywall. I thought he'd been buried with it. But here it was, worn, scratched, still ticking. "He left it in the drawer by the bed," she said. "With a note that just said, 'Give it to the boy when he's ready.'" The boy. Not your son. Not Caleb. The boy. His boy. I slipped the watch on. It didn't quite fit. Not yet. But it would. That night, I lit a fire in the burn barrel out back, just like he used to do on cold nights when the world felt too heavy. I fed it bits of scrap wood and broken parts too far gone to fix. And then, without planning to, I picked up one of the carvings. The red bird. The one I found the first week, hidden behind the grinder. I held it for a long time. Then I kissed it, whispered, "Thank you," and placed it gently into the fire. It didn't burn right away. It curled slowly, blackened feather by feather, before finally catching. The flames danced higher, as if recognizing the offering. Some things, I realized, have to be released in order to stay. That's the paradox of love, isn't it? You let it go so it can live on in someone else. Around midnight I heard it again. The sound from the shed. Not just a tool sliding, but something else. A low hum. Almost a voice. Not words. Not music. Just a presence. I stepped inside, barefoot on the cold floor, guided only by moonlight. Everything was in place. Nothing had moved. Except the vise. It was tightened around something. A new carving. Different from the others. Larger. A plaque. I walked over, heart pounding. It wasn't finished. Rough edges, corners still raw. But the message was there, carved in that stubborn blocky scrawl. "You built me too." And beneath it, one last line. "Thank you, son." I dropped to my knees. Not from grief. From completion. From the crushing, beautiful weight of being chosen. Of being seen. Of being enough. I don't know how long I knelt there. Long enough for the moon to shift. Long enough for the first birds to start their early songs. Long enough to understand that I wasn't alone, and never really had been. Love had lived in that shed for decades. And now it lived in me. When I stood, the plaque was warm in my hands. I hung it above the workbench, right where the sun would hit it first thing each morning. And as I turned to go, I glanced back one last time. The tools hung perfectly still. But in the window's reflection, I swear I saw him, just for a second. Not smiling. Just watching. Like he always did. And then he was gone. But the feeling remained. The day I found the ledger was the day everything started making sense. Not just Rick's love for tools, or why the shed felt like it breathed when I entered. It was deeper than that. This ledger, old, leather-bound, pages curled and stained, wasn't a list of hardware or projects like I first assumed. It was a record of sacrifice. It had been tucked inside the false bottom of the cabinet where he kept his finishing oils. I only noticed it because a nail slipped into the crack as I was organizing. When I reached in to retrieve it, my fingers brushed leather. The cover was unmarked. But inside, pages and pages of neat, careful writing. More deliberate than his usual block letter scribbles. Smaller, tighter. Almost like he was afraid to take up space. The first entry was dated the year he married my mother. February 12, 1998. Put in for overtime again. Told Jan I didn't mind missing the Valentine's dinner. Truth is, Caleb needed new shoes. Didn't want her to know I saw the soles coming loose. My hands started shaking. This wasn't a journal. It was a ledger of choices. Every page, a decision he made to put us first. To go without. To give more. Quietly. Without credit. Without expectation. Another entry. March 3, 2000. Cancelled fishing trip with Don. Caleb's dad called and said he'd come by. Didn't show. Sat with the boy anyway. We built a birdhouse instead. My throat closed. I remembered that birdhouse. We painted it blue. It stayed in our maple tree until the storm knocked it down years later. I never knew why he was home that day. Or why he didn't mention the trip he gave up. Now I did. The more I read, the more I saw him, not as the distant man I thought I'd outgrown, but as someone who made 1,000 tiny decisions to love me when it would have been easier to keep his distance. May 6, 2005. Caleb's birthday. Didn't say much. He barely looked at me. Still bought the telescope. He always liked stars. Maybe he'll let me show him one night. October 14, 2007. Walked in on him crying. Didn't ask why. Just tightened the door on his dresser so it wouldn't squeak when he slammed it again. June 2, 2012. He left for college today. Didn't hug me. Didn't say goodbye. That's okay. I told the shed everything I couldn't tell him. I had to put the book down after that. Not because I couldn't handle it, but because I finally could. Later that afternoon, I carried the ledger out to the porch. Sat in the same chair Rick used to drink his evening coffee from. The wood creaked under my weight, but didn't give. Just like him. I opened the back cover. There was a folded page taped there. Different paper. Lighter. Torn from a spiral notebook. Written in ink, not pencil. If Caleb ever finds this, then I guess I'm gone. Tell him I never wanted to replace anybody. I just wanted to be there. And I was. Every chance I got. Even when he didn't see it. Even when it hurt. At the bottom, one last line. Love is the nail that holds the beam. Even when it rusts. I wept so hard I nearly dropped the book. Because I finally understood something my real father never gave me the chance to learn. You don't need blood to be a father. You need presence. You need quiet strength. You need nails and hands and sacrifice. That night, I had another dream. I was a child again, standing in the shed, watching Rick build something I couldn't see. He didn't speak. Just smiled once, then pointed at the bench. I walked over, and there, carved into the wood, was a phrase I hadn't seen before. Some men plant trees whose shade they'll never sit in. I woke up gasping. rushed to the shed. And there it was, carved beneath the lip of the bench. So faint it could have been missed unless you knew to look. I ran my fingers across the groove. It was real. And it had been there for years. Waiting. Like everything else he left behind. I've started writing my own ledger now. Not because I think I can live up to what Rick did, but because I want to remember how he loved. Every drawer fixed. Every nail pounded in straight. Every time he stayed when he could have walked. It's not just about mourning him. It's about becoming him. Bit by bit. Project by project. Word by word. Because Rick chose me. And now, I choose him back. Every damn day. By the time summer rolled in, the shed had turned from a place I was afraid of into the place I lived in. Not literally, I still slept in my old bedroom, the one with the sagging bookshelf and the glow-in-the-dark stars I refused to peel off the ceiling. But in every other sense, I lived in that shed. It became a heartbeat. Every morning, coffee in hand, I unlocked the door. Every night, the tools slid softly back into place like hands folding themselves in prayer. And slowly, I started to realize something that both scared and comforted me. This place wasn't just about Rick anymore. It was about me. About who I was becoming, now that I'd let him in. I kept building. A bench for the front porch, like the one he used to sit on when he was waiting for Mom to get home from the night shift. A toy chest for my cousin's daughter. Simple things. Solid things. Things that made people stop and run their fingers over the grain. I never signed anything I built. But I always burned 2 letters into the underside. RP. He'd earned that. More than earned it. One afternoon, I drove into town for new sandpaper and ended up at Rick's old hardware store. The bell over the door jingled like it always had, but the place felt smaller now. Quieter. The guy behind the counter, Dan, who must have been pushing 70 now, looked up and smiled. Well, I'll be damned. Little Caleb. I didn't bother correcting him. No one around here ever dropped the little. I was 35 years old, but in that store, I was still the kid who knocked over a bin of screws and cried because I thought Rick would be mad. Dan reached under the counter without asking and pulled out a dusty box. Your old man left this here about 5 years back. Said you'd come for it one day. I blinked. Rick? He nodded. Said not to open it until the shed felt like yours. I didn't even remember the drive home. Inside the box, blueprints. Dozens of them. Every page was labeled with a title in Rick's unmistakable blocky scrawl. For Caleb. Some were detailed, tables, shelves, a hand-carved crib. Others were just sketches. Half-finished ideas. Scribbles that only made sense if you knew the way he thought. But one was different. A full schematic. Inked carefully. Dated just a year before he died. The tree house. My breath caught. He'd talked about it once. Briefly. When I was a teenager and too old to care. Might build one in the oak out back, he'd said. Even if you don't use it. Just to say we did. I rolled the plans out across the bench. Every detail was there. A ladder. 2 windows. A pulley for a basket. Even a trapdoor. He never got the chance to build it. But he wanted to. For me. That night, I walked out to the old oak behind the shed. It was still strong. The base thick and wide, branches stretching toward the sky like open arms. And then I did something that felt like prayer. I placed my hand against the bark. I'll build it, I whispered. The wind answered with a gentle rustle, and the shed light flickered behind me, just once. Like agreement. The next few weeks were work. Real work. Digging, measuring, cutting through sweat and heat and every drop of doubt still clinging to me. I followed Rick's plans to the letter, only improvising where I felt he would have trusted me to. I could feel him there. Every time I measured twice before cutting. Every time a board sat flush against another with that perfect, solid thunk. Every time I paused and stood back, saw what was taking shape, and thought. He would have been proud of this. Not for the craftsmanship. For the care. Because that's what Rick built with. Always. Even when it wasn't visible. One evening, I climbed up the finished ladder, sat in the doorway of the treehouse, and watched the sun bleed gold through the trees. The wood was warm beneath me, the smell of pine thick in the air. I hadn't cried in days. Not because I wasn't still grieving, but because the grief had changed shape. It had become purpose. And then I heard it. Not from the shed. From inside the treehouse. A soft thunk. I turned. On the far wall, screwed into the beam, was a small wooden plaque. One I hadn't installed. It was old, older than the rest of the materials. Like it had been carved years ago and saved. "You're ready now, Dad." Just that. Nothing else. I pressed my hand against it. Not crying. Just breathing. And for the first time since Rick died, I felt full. Not of pain. Of him. Of everything he left in me, whether I wanted it or not. That night, I dreamed I had a son. Dark-haired, serious-eyed. We were in the shed together, his small hands wrapped around a chisel, his voice excited as he asked, "Did Grandpa make this?" I knelt beside him. "No," I said. "We did." And somewhere in the dream, behind us, I heard a soft chuckle. Then the quiet scrape of a hammer sliding back into place. The first real rain came 2 nights after I finished the treehouse. The kind that rolls in heavy and mean, with thunder that shakes the porch floor and lightning that slices the sky open like a wound. I stood at the kitchen sink watching it all come down, water hammering the roof in thick sheets. The treehouse held. I could see it from the window, sturdy, unmoving, like it had always been there. But it wasn't the treehouse I was worried about. It was the shed. Even after everything, the carvings, the letters, the shifting tools, I still worried that too much water, too much time, might finally wear it down. Might wash away the last traces of him. I waited until the thunder rolled into the distance, then pulled on my boots and stepped into the storm. The shed door was already open when I got there. Not wide. Just a crack. Like someone had slipped inside and forgotten to shut it behind them. Inside, everything was exactly where it should be. Except the hammer. It was lying on the bench again, right where it always ended up. But this time, there was something else beside it, a small folded piece of canvas, like the kind you'd wrap around tools for a long trip. I unrolled it slowly. Inside were 5 items. A worn photo of me and Rick in front of the shed, me holding a crooked birdhouse, him half smiling like he always did when he was proud but didn't want to show it. A folded blueprint labeled, "Retirement Project, 2021. A chisel with my initials burned into the handle. A lock of my hair, childhood blonde, wrapped in twine. And a note. Short. Crooked lettering. A little faded from time. Wanted to leave you something that didn't need explaining. If you're still here, I guess it worked. Everything I built was for someone else. This shed? This one was for us." I sat down on the stool. My legs couldn't hold me anymore. The blueprint was for a 2-room cabin. Tucked into the woods. No frills. Just solid beams, a wood stove, and a covered porch. It had a title, scribbled in red at the top. "For the man he'll become." I stayed in the shed all night. The storm passed. The roof held. The walls breathed. I lit the old lantern in the corner and read every blueprint again, every page of the ledger. I rehung tools just to hear the click of them settling home. And somewhere around dawn, I realized what the shed really was. It wasn't just a workshop. It was a witness. It saw him love. It saw him stay. It saw me grow. It saw me leave. It saw me come back. And now it saw me. The man Rick had built with calloused hands and quiet grace. I buried the time capsule the next day. Not in the ground. In the shed. Beneath the floorboard where he'd once hidden the key. I packed the canvas bundle carefully, added a copy of the ledger, and sealed it in a tin box. Not to forget, but to remember better. For the next set of hands. Maybe my sons. Maybe someone else who would come here broken and need to be reminded that even silence can hold you together. I hammered the board back into place, wiped the dust from my palms, and just stood there for a while, letting the quiet hold me. That evening, Mom asked if I'd help her go through Rick's old desk. We hadn't touched it since the funeral. It was mostly what I expected: tax returns, insurance papers, a few receipts so faded you couldn't read the ink. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of appliance manuals, I found a folder labeled "Letters Never Sent." I almost didn't open it. But I did. They were all addressed to my biological father. Some dated as far back as 1999. Some just a few months before Rick died. Each one a variation of the same theme. "You left a good kid behind. I just want you to know, he's okay. I've got him. He deserves more than silence. If you ever show up again, don't expect to come waltzing in. You gave up your chance. I didn't. He still looks for you in crowds. That hurts. But I'm doing what I can." The last one, dated just weeks before the cancer diagnosis. "He doesn't call me Dad. He probably never will. But I don't need it. When he's in pain, he comes home. That's enough for me." I closed the folder and slid it back into the drawer. I wanted to scream. To cry. To find the man who'd walked out and throw these pages at his feet. But instead I walked outside. Lit a fire. And one by one, I fed the letters into the flames. Because Rick wasn't writing them for my father. He was writing them for me. So I'd know, one day, that he never stopped protecting me, even from the silence I'd been too afraid to name. After the fire died down, I sat on the back steps and watched the moon rise. The treehouse stood in silhouette. The shed glowed faintly under the porch light. And I whispered into the night, "You can rest now. I've got it from here." The wind picked up softly. From the shed came one quiet sound. A nail slipping into place. Like a chapter closing. Like a man laying down his tools for the final time. I didn't expect the call. It was from a lawyer. Not Rick's, not ours. A firm out of Houston. "We have some papers," the woman said, "that name you as a potential heir." I laughed, confused. "To what?" "Not what. Who?" She paused. "Your biological father. He passed 3 months ago." The words barely registered. I hadn't seen that man in over 20 years. He'd left when I was 9, resurfaced once when I was 16, drunk, messy, full of promises he didn't mean. Rick never said a word about it afterward. Just stood with me in the garage that night, handing me a wrench, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. I hadn't heard a single thing since. Until now. "He left you something," the woman said. "A box. That's all. Would you like us to mail it?" I almost said no. Almost. But something in me, curiosity, maybe, or spite, said yes. The box came 2 days later. It was small, unremarkable, wrapped in plain brown paper. No return address. Just my name, written in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside, a single manila envelope. A note paper clipped to the front. "Didn't know what else to do with this. Guess you deserve to see it. Angela, from the bar." Inside the envelope were photographs. Hundreds of them. Me. Some were Polaroids, some cheap printed snapshots, some old newspaper clippings with my name circled in red. Me at the science fair. Me at a baseball game. Me with Mom, crossing the street. He'd been watching. From a distance. A ghost orbiting the life he'd abandoned. There was no letter. No apology. Just evidence. Proof that he looked, but never once came close enough to matter. I laid the photos out across the shed floor. The shed, my refuge, my chapel of wood and memory. It watched me as I worked through every snapshot. Every version of me he'd stalked but never claimed. I felt hollow. Not angry. Just done. Because here it was, in full color. He saw me grow. And chose not to be part of it. I gathered the photos, every last one, and placed them in the same burned barrel I used weeks earlier. But I didn't light it. Not yet. Instead, I went to the shed and pulled down Rick's ledger. Found the entry from the night my father last called. Caleb waited by the door until midnight. I sat with him, even when he wouldn't look at me. He never asked where his father was. I never told him he didn't need to. I read it twice. 3 times. Let the truth of it sink into the cracks he'd already filled for me. Rick hadn't been a substitute. He'd been the point. The standard. The real damn thing. I lit the match. The photos curled into ash. Not to erase the past, but to give the truth a place to breathe. The next morning, I pulled down the last unfinished blueprint Rick had ever drawn. It was simple. A bench swing, meant to hang between 2 trees. He'd sketched it out in his final months. I remembered watching him one evening, sketchpad in hand, chewing the edge of his pencil while the oxygen tank hissed quietly beside him. "I'll finish that later," he said when I asked what he was drawing. He never did. But I would. I took the blueprint into the shed and laid it across the workbench. The plaque above it, "You built me too," seemed to shimmer in the morning light. This wasn't just a project. It was a ceremony. I selected the wood he would have picked, nothing fancy, but solid. The kind that ages well. The kind that remembers the hands that shaped it. Each cut, each bolt, was a conversation between us. I could hear his voice again. "Slower on the drill, kid. Let the bit do the work. That joint's too tight, you're gonna split the board. There you go. Now it's solid." He never said, "I love you," but I could still hear it in the quiet. Every instruction was love. Every correction was belief. Every hour spent beside me was a vow he never broke. When I hung the bench swing between the trees, I sat in it alone. Listened to it creak beneath my weight, the chains straining ever so slightly. And I whispered the words I never said enough when he was alive. "Thank you for staying. For building a place where I could fall apart and put myself back together. For choosing me when no one else did. For doing the work without needing to be seen. Because now, I saw it all." That night I dreamed again. I was sitting on the swing, and next to me sat Rick, not young, not sick. Just there. No tools in hand. No blueprints. No need to explain anything. He didn't speak. But he reached over, placed one hand on my shoulder, and squeezed. And then he handed me something. A nail. One of his. I held it tight. Woke with it still in my palm. Except, it wasn't a dream. There, resting on the pillow beside me, was a small steel nail. Rusted at the tip. Worn. Familiar. As if it had waited years for this moment. I didn't ask how it got there. Some things aren't meant to be explained. Some things are meant to be believed. After the nail appeared, everything slowed down. Not in the sense of time stopping, but like the world took a breath. The shed stopped moving things. The tools stayed in place. The air felt still, but not empty. It was like Rick had said all he needed to say, and now the rest was up to me. It's strange how a man can die, and somehow still be louder in absence. I kept the nail in my pocket everywhere I went. Tapped it between my fingers when I thought. Rubbed its bent head like a worry stone. It wasn't just a nail, it was him. A piece of his truth. A weight that grounded me. Mom found me one morning, standing at the shed door with the nail in my hand. I hadn't noticed her. She was holding a photo frame I didn't recognize. "I thought you should have this," she said. I took it from her carefully. It was a photo of Rick and me, not one I remembered. I must have been maybe 13, scowling with arms crossed while he stood behind me, one hand resting on my shoulder. We were in front of a half-built table. He wasn't smiling. Just looking at me. The kind of look a father gives a son when he's trying to stay out of the way while still holding up the world. She touched my arm. "You used to fight him every step of the way. But he never stopped showing up." I nodded. "I know that now." She smiled sadly. "He knew you would. Eventually, that day, I drove to the lumberyard. Not for a project. For something else. I walked the aisles with my fingers trailing across boards, until I found one that felt right, thick, heavy-grained, not flawless. Something real. Something with history. Then I bought a set of brass letters and a chisel. Back home, I took the board to the shed and laid it across the workbench. I traced the words slowly, breathing between each one. Then I began to carve. The shed stayed silent as I worked. No flickers, no ghost sounds. Just the honest scrape of blade on wood. When I was done, I hung the finished piece above the door. It read, "The Shop. EST 1998. He chose US. We choose him." I thought that would be the final word. But the shed had one more secret. I found it 2 days later, behind the cabinet we almost never moved. I was cleaning for the first time in weeks, dragging a broom through the dust, when I bumped the back wall and heard something shift. I pushed the cabinet aside. Behind it, a narrow slot in the wall, barely wide enough to fit a hand. Inside the slot, a cigar box sealed shut with black duct tape. I peeled it open slowly. Inside, a small cassette tape and a folded napkin. On the napkin, in Rick's handwriting. If I couldn't say it, maybe I could leave it behind. I stared at it for a long time before I dug out the old cassette player from the attic. Popped the tape in. Press play. For a moment, nothing but hiss. Then his voice. Rough. Quiet. Uneven. "I don't know what to say, Caleb. You were never mine, but I tried to be yours. Every day. I know I didn't say it enough. I know I wasn't easy. But you gave me something to build around. You gave me a reason to stay steady. I hope you see it now. I hope you feel it when you stand in that shop. That's where I put everything I couldn't tell you out loud." A long pause. A shaky breath. "I love you, son." The tape clicked off. Just like that. Not a performance. Not some tearful goodbye. Just him. Leaving behind the 3 words he never managed to say while he was alive. I sat in the attic with the player in my lap for a long, long time. Crying. But not from pain. From something deeper. Something like a rival. I took the tape to the shed. Set the player on the bench. And played it again, letting his voice echo in the space he built with his hands. This time, I didn't cry. I just listened. Because now, I wasn't mourning him. I was remembering him right. Not the way he died. The way he lived. Every rusted screw. Every replaced doorknob. Every fight he swallowed. Every step closer he took, even when I pushed him away. That night I carved a new plaque. I mounted it inside the treehouse, just above the trapdoor. "Love, built quietly, outlasts everything." The swing moved gently beside me, the breeze soft against my face. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a boy missing his father. I felt like a man made by one. Autumn came slowly that year. The kind of slow that feels intentional. Leaves didn't just fall, they drifted, like they knew this place wasn't in a hurry anymore. The trees behind the house flamed red and gold, and the sky softened into the kind of blue that only shows up when something hard has finally ended. I'd spent months in the shed by then. Working. Remembering. Becoming. But I hadn't left yet. Not really. I was still clinging to the grief, like letting it go would mean letting him go. And maybe I didn't want to stop mourning. Maybe I didn't know who I was without the ache. Then one morning, I stepped out to the porch and saw the shed door wide open. Not just cracked. Wide. It hadn't done that before. I froze. Then I went to it, slow, half expecting the usual hum of presents, or the tools softly clicking into place. But there was nothing. Only sunlight filtering through the slats. Only quiet. Only me. And that's when I knew. Rick had left. Not disappeared. Not gone. Just moved deeper into everything. Into the way I stood when I measured a board. Into the way I waited for a moment before speaking. Into the way I loved people, not loudly, but by showing up. He was gone from the shed. Because he'd taken root in me. I packed up the last of his old tools that week. Not all of them, some stayed on the walls, exactly where he left them. Not for use. For memory. For presents. But the rest? I boxed them carefully. Labeled each one. Wrote, to be passed down. On the side in permanent marker. Because I knew this wouldn't end with me. One day, someone else will need what Rick gave me. Not advice. Not even stories. Just wait. Just wood. Just proof that love, when built the right way, stays. On a warm October afternoon, I finally called her. Claire. We hadn't talked since before the funeral. We met in college. Dated off and on for years. She wanted roots. I wanted distance. And then I got the call about Rick, and everything else dropped away. But now, with the leaves falling and the shed quiet, I found myself wanting to plant something. She answered on the third ring. I didn't explain everything. Just asked if she'd come see the place. She said yes. She arrived 2 days later. When she stepped into the yard, she stopped in her tracks. You built that? She asked, pointing at the treehouse. I nodded. She walked toward it, slow, running her hand along the ladder rung before turning to look at the shed. This is where you went? I nodded again. She stepped inside the shed without asking, and I followed. She looked around, fingers tracing the plaque over the bench. Then she spotted the player, still sitting on the corner. I hesitated. Then I pressed play. Rick's voice filled the space one last time. I love you, son. When it ended, Claire turned to me, eyes glassy. You didn't just lose him, she whispered. You found him. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She got it. Somehow, without knowing the whole story, she got it. We sat on the swing under the treehouse that evening, watching the wind carry the season out of the woods. And she asked, Do you think you'll stay here? I looked at the shed. At the home Rick built. At the boy I used to be, still echoing inside those walls. At the man I was now, crafted, not inherited. Yes, I said. I think I finally am. She smiled. Took my hand. And for the first time, I didn't flinch. A year passed. Then 2. We had a son. Named him Richard. He doesn't know what it means yet, what that name holds, what it carries. But someday he will. Because I'll show him the shed. I'll teach him how to hold a hammer like it matters. I'll tell him about the man who stayed. The man who carved love out of silence. The man who taught me that, Dad, isn't a title you're born with. It's something you build. Nail by nail. Day by day. Choice by quiet choice. Last week, my boy toddled into the shed for the first time. He found the hammer. The one Rick always left on the bench. The one that moved when no one touched it. And as I watched him reach for it, 2 tiny hands full of wonder, I felt a whisper pass through the walls. You're doing good, son. I smiled. Picked up my boy. And put the hammer back where it belongs. Right where Rick would have left it. Right where it will wait for him. Because that's what real fathers do. They choose. They stay. They build a world so solid, so steady, that even after they're gone, the tools still know where to go.